Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 23, to be perfectly precise. I'm your host, as usual, Billy Donnelly, who you can find at joeblow.com. This is Infamous, and right here at Just the Worst Podcast. And coming out of President's Day weekend, lots to talk about as far as the movies are concerned. A lot of things to sort of sort through, both positive and negative. Going to try and put them in as best perspective as I can from you moving forward. So without further ado, let's get right into the action, get our hands dirty, and talk some movies. Right out of the gate, I mean, how can you avoid talking about Deadpool? Deadpool opening to a record-setting $135 million weekend. That is the largest debut for an R-rated movie ever in the history of cinema. Deadpool now sits at number one. It not only shattered that record, but also laid claim to having the biggest President's Day weekend opening, as well as the biggest opening for a movie released in the month of February, if we really want to get technical on all the records that it now holds. But look, Deadpool is an interesting circumstance right now, because this is really one of the few times that a major Hollywood studio has gone the R-rated route for a comic book / superhero property, and this time it paid off in major fashion. You're talking about a film that was shot for a moderate budget, only about $58 million, which for a movie like this is really not in the cards anymore. Films that were made for $58 million used to be sort of the norm. And now they are the exception to the rule. You know, once upon a time, a film having $100 million budget was seen to be rather large, kind of obscene. That's where the big budget blockbusters were going. $100 million. So $58 million right now, which seems like peanuts in the overall landscape of Hollywood, is pretty mind-blowing at this point in time. But you look at what Deadpool was, and Deadpool in a number of ways isn't like any other comic book / superhero movie out there. And as I record this, all throughout the week, it's been nothing but internet think pieces about why Deadpool worked, and analysts breaking in with why Deadpool worked, what did it do right. And I have my own opinions on it, but I thought it was actually summed up pretty well by director James Gunn, who was responsible for bringing Guardians of the Galaxy to the forefront and into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a film and a property that no one outside of probably about 15 hardcore Guardians of the Galaxy comic readers even knew about. And yet, Guardians of the Galaxy is probably one of the most beloved films that exists inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And not just for people who are Marvel fans, but that's a film that also brought in mainstream fans that weren't necessarily beholden to the Marvel brand. People that just looked at this weird thing and said to themselves, that looks kind of fun, looks kind of interesting, looks kind of different, looks sort of intriguing. And so James Gunn offered up some of his thoughts as related to, I believe it was Deadline's opine as far as what worked for Deadpool. And I'm going to read his quote in full because I think it's kind of important. And then we'll sort of go from there, because I think I'm sort of on the same page here as James Gunn as far as why Deadpool worked as well as it did. So here's his quote. Quote, "After every movie smashes records, people here in Hollywood love to throw out the definitive reasons why the movie was a hit. I saw it happen with Guardians. It, quote, wasn't afraid to be fun, or it, quote, was colorful and funny, etc., etc., etc. And next thing I know of here, of 100 film projects being set up, quote, like Guardians. And I start seeing dozens of trailers exactly like the Guardians trailer, with a big pop song and a bunch of quips. Ugh. Ugh, 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 ugh. Deadpool wasn't that. Deadpool was its own thing. That's what people are reacting to. It's original. It's damn good. It was made with love by the filmmakers, and it wasn't afraid to take risks. For the theatrical experience to survive, spectacle films need to expand their definition of what they can be. They need to be unique and true voices of the filmmakers behind them. They can't just be copying what came before them. So over the next few months, if you pay attention to the trades, you'll see Hollywood misunderstanding the lesson they should be learning with Deadpool. They'll be greenlighting films, quote, like Deadpool, but by that, they won't mean, quote, good and original, but, quote, a raunchy superhero film, or, quote, it breaks the fourth wall. They'll treat you like you're stupid, which is the one thing Deadpool didn't do. But hopefully, in the midst of all this, there will be a studio or two that will take the right lesson from this, like Fox did with Guardians by greenlighting Deadpool, and say, quote, boy, maybe we can give them something they don't already have. And that's who is going to succeed. And I think James Gunn nails this so perfectly because of the fact that Hollywood is such a copycat business that everybody sees something that works, and then rather than trying to make their own thing work, they just try and go back to duplicate the success of what came before. And as we all know, a duplicate of the original is never quite as good. Just go copy. Go stick something in a copier. Xerox machine. Make a copy of something. Even just take a picture of something. It's not as good as seeing the real deal. And we have this all the time when we have a big monumental hit, is then just a bunch of sort of mimics of that in the hopes of catching lightning in a bottle again. The superhero genre especially has been sort of defined by this, and particularly over at Warner Brothers. You go back a few years to when The Dark Knight and Batman Begins were hits, and really more so The Dark Knight. Batman Begins did well for Warner Brothers, but it was nowhere near the breakout hit that The Dark Knight was, and then that The Dark Knight Rises followed up with. But following those films, Warner Brothers wanted everything to be sort of gritty and grounded as opposed to fantastical. They wanted a serious Superman film, which is what we got with Man of Steel. Because once again, everything had to be sort of like Batman, because look what Christopher Nolan was able to do with Batman. So let's try and make all of our superhero movies like that, even though that the reason that Batman worked was because it was so different in being gritty and grounded. It was unlike the Tim Burton Batman films. It was unlike the Joel Schumacher Batman films. This was something different. It treated Batman as a real thing and not necessarily a cartoon or a comic book character. And as a result, people gravitated towards that. But that didn't mean that that sort of strategy could then be applied to any other superhero property. What works for one doesn't work for all. You can't just have sort of a round hole and take all of these shapes and try and jam them into the round hole. And then when they don't work out, go, I don't know what the fuck happened. Marvel, if you look at Marvel as far as how Marvel operates in a way that the films are kind of samey because they're trying to make them fit within the universe. But they are also different. No two films are exactly alike. They all come at the material from a different way. So it's not like you feels like you're watching the same movie all the time. Tonally, they're able to do a lot of things. They're very versatile. So they can be funny, and they can be exciting and adventurous and action-packed and dramatic and serious and emotional. They can do all of those things and sort of give you a well-rounded theatrical experience when you go to see them. And I think that's something that Deadpool managed to do. It was sort of do a little bit of everything. It was dirty and it was raunchy and it was violent, but it was also sweet and very heartfelt. But it also was doing something that other films of that nature weren't attempting to do. And as a result, people responded more to the freshness of what Deadpool represented. Felt like a breath of fresh air watching that movie than they did for any other number of reasons. Now, I think James Gunn is absolutely right that people will look at this and they'll go, well, how can we make other films like Deadpool? Which is the complete wrong message to take from the film and the success of the film. Deadpool works as its own thing. So now, rather than try to duplicate that, try to make your properties feel like their own thing. I mean, you go back to last year's Fantastic Four failure over 20th Century Fox, and what did that film do? Try to, once again, sort of have a grounded superhero film, which for the Fantastic Four, I don't think necessarily works. And prior to that, they may have gone with an approach that was a little too cartoonish for people. So maybe you find some sort of middle ground. But trying to make a Fantastic Four film like other films doesn't work. Trying to make a Superman film like other films doesn't work. Trying to make other films like Deadpool or Guardians of the Galaxy, that doesn't work. People are able to see through that. They're able to look at that and say, they're just trying to ape this other thing. And you overexpose the approach, and you run it into the ground, and you make people sick of it. A Deadpool sequel, which is on the way, will be true to what Deadpool feels like. But not everything else needs to be like Deadpool. 20th Century Fox now doesn't have to go out of their way and make X-Men films feel like Deadpool, or Fantastic Four film feel like Deadpool, or an X-Force film feel like Deadpool. Those things need to be unique to themselves. And if the time comes for these properties to sort of cross over into some sort of shared universe, then you figure that out then. How to make those tones work, that's where things get really interesting, because now, once again, fans become fascinated by how do you put this world and that world together. And once again, now there's a freshness to it. There's an air of mystery to it. It doesn't feel the same. It becomes a matter of, I don't know. How does that work together? You take these two worlds that feel so incredibly different and bring them together into one that can be somehow consistent. My hat's off to 20th Century Fox for taking the risk with Deadpool. And that's the thing about Deadpool, is that it never feels corporate, safe. Because there's not a lot of money at stake, I mean, $58 million is still a lot of money, but it's less than, $250 million. So because of that, they were able to take some risk. They were able to take some chances. And it shows. And that is one of the lessons to be taken with Deadpool, is that sometimes you really just got to go for it. You got to go for it, and you got to trust in your audience. That they are smart enough, and in many ways, they typically are. Smart enough to understand it, smart enough to embrace it, smart enough to accept it, smart enough to want to be a part of this unique thing. So when films and studios and filmmakers and storytellers treat the audience like idiots and insult their intelligence, that's where you run into problems. Because people can see through that bullshit. And it never bodes well for you. And that brings us right back to 20th Century Fox, as word is now starting to circulate that they are looking into making Wolverine 3, the third solo Wolverine film, and the last time that Hugh Jackman will inhabit the character of Wolverine, an R-rated affair. A pamphlet was handed around by 20th Century Fox as a result of one of their presentations at this year's 2016 Toy Fair that listed the third Wolverine film with an anticipated rating of R. Now, I'm not one of those people that goes out of their way to be outraged when a film has a particular rating. Oh, I can't believe this movie's PG-13. It should be R. Because I think the PG rating allows films to get away with so much more than they used to, particularly in the area of violence. When it comes to language and it comes to nudity, they've sort of buttoned up a little bit. When it comes to violence, violence is something that they've been able to really open the doors on with the MPAA. And I look at this and I say to myself, see, they don't get it. They don't understand. They look at something like Deadpool and they think that the reason that it succeeded is because it was rated R, when really the reason that Deadpool succeeded is that it existed within the constructs of an R rating and made the most of the freedoms that come with it. Does a film like Wolverine need those same freedoms? I don't know. I'd like to think not. Considering that we've come so far in the X-Men universe with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine without ever having to dip into an R rating, I'd like to think that the character's been fine to now. They were able to use the PG-13 rating to their advantage, going back to X-Men First Class, in order to bring Wolverine into the fold and use one instance in his cameo for him to say, go fuck yourself, within the PG-13 restrictions. Do I need a Wolverine film, though, where Logan's just running around dropping F-bombs? I think that's a little much. And I don't know that it's going to contribute to the success of a Wolverine film by going down that route. So an R rating for a Wolverine film, I don't know if that's the right path to take. I know 20th Century Fox does, because they look at Deadpool and they say, well, see, look, people want R-rated superhero films. No, they wanted that R-rated superhero film. That doesn't mean they all have to be R-rated superhero films. The studios need to find their own identities for these characters, rather than trying to fit them inside of some sort of box, believing that that's the road to success. So I would beg 20th Century Fox to reconsider and think about this. Think real long and real hard about this. Because once you go, there's no turning back. And I would hate to see Hugh Jackman's last run as Wolverine sort of sullied by the fact that you wanted to make it like something else that it is clearly not. Speaking of superhero properties or films that could be in trouble, seems to be a lot of uneasiness starting to surface, starting to bubble up over at Warner Brothers regarding Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So I won't necessarily say worry, but anxiety, at the very least, has got to be there. Now, this started to circulate with a report from Drew McWeeny over at HitFix saying that there is a lot of hand-wringing going on right now in the Warner Brothers offices regarding what Zack Snyder will be bringing to the big screen at the end of March. Batman v Superman is a film that I have said for quite some time has an incredible amount of pressure on it right now. And not just for itself, but for the long-range future of the DC cinematic universe that is trying to be raised from the ground. Man of Steel was not the overwhelming success that they thought it was going to be. And they thought by bringing Batman in, that might sort of skew things in their favor, to get things going in the right direction, because people love Batman. But let's be honest here, Batman v Superman has really spiraled out of control for Warner Brothers. They're betting the proverbial house on this thing. Literally. We talk about Deadpool being made for about $58 million. With marketing costs, Batman v Superman is going to run up a receipt tally of about $400 million. Which is just absurd. Which means when you look at global box office and what this film has to make in order to be quote unquote a true success, you're talking about a film that's got to be over $1 billion in box office for Warner Brothers to say, look, we came out ahead. And the concern right now over Warner Brothers isn't that they've made a film that people won't like. It's that they've made a film divisive enough that there are going to be more than a few people that aren't going to like it. And that's not really the way to $1 billion box office. The thing about these films that reach that new milestone is that they're crowd pleasers. Or at least films attempting to be crowd pleasers. When you go and you look at what Warner Brothers is putting together for their DC Cinematic Universe, whether it's Man of Steel or what we've seen so far with Batman v Superman, these aren't films that look like they are even made with pleasing the crowd in mind. And that's perfectly fine. As we said earlier, sometimes you just got to make a film that's good and original, that does its own thing, that isn't like everything else. But with that, you also wind up running the risk that the general public will reject your vision. That's not to say that they rejected Man of Steel, but there are plenty of people who did. There are plenty of people who look at Man of Steel and they say, nah, not for me. And there are people who are going to look at Batman v Superman and say, nah, not for me. $1 billion is a lot of money to try and clear. You look even over at the best of the Marvel films, films that are aiming to be crowd pleasers, and they're not able to get up there. Now, I understand that Batman and Superman are two of the greatest trio of A-list superheroes, with Spider-Man being the third. Those would be really the upper echelon, the upper tier of superheroes, Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. So as a result, Warner Brothers may have expectations by just having those two in a film together. That may be enough to push them over the edge. But you also got to remember that you need to generate a good quality film to go along with those names. And while I understand, we're going for a more serious, more grounded tone, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to come along for the ride. And if you have another film that's divisive, you're not going to get $1 billion. You're not going to recoup $400 million in your budget without seeing some losses. I don't know that it's going to be enough to sort of redirect where things are going. Wonder Woman in production, Justice League Part 1 going to be ready to go right after. Will it affect the larger span, of the DC Cinematic Universe? With a Flash film, and an Aquaman film, and Green Lantern Corps, and Cyborg? Who knows? After all, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So if you look at Man of Steel and then you look at Batman v Superman and they don't set the world on fire, you may have to go ahead and readjust your plans moving forward, which publicly, perception-wise, doesn't really do Warner Brothers a lot of favor. But that's what happens when you start to build a universe without any sort of foundation there. When you go out of your way to start announcing films all the way through 2019 and 2020 before you've even taken off from the ground. So, anxiety over Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice does not surprise me. Will it be enough if the film doesn't deliver to really take a sledgehammer to the plans and re-examine where they are moving forward? I don't know. It's going to be tough because, once again, Wonder Woman is already going to be starting to tie into that universe with a similar tone. So it'll be interesting to see how things go forward if Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is not the rousing success that Warner Brothers hopes it will be. I'm hopeful for this film. And that's coming as someone who's not a Man of Steel fan. But when you have that much money invested in one film and so much riding on it, It's a real do or die situation. That is a lot of weight for these two superhero behemoths to shoulder. And I don't know that they're up to it. So I wish Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice well. I hope Warner Brothers does have something that is excellent for all of us. But if it's not, if it doesn't turn out that way, there's going to be some real soul searching going on over at Warner Brothers before they make one further decision to go ahead. And that's not a rumor. That's fact. Okay, I gotta talk a little bit Ghostbusters this week. At least Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film that's coming out in July. We got a trailer announcement earlier this week that says we'll finally get to see or catch a look at what the new Ghostbusters film is going to look at. I believe that is March 3rd that trailer is supposed to drop. So for those of you who are just itching to see what the new Ghostbusters moving forward is going to be, well, that's when you're going to get it. And look, I've been a pretty staunch defender of Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. From the get-go. I know there's a lot of people who looked at this film and they say, oh my god, I can't believe they're doing this, and it's the gender bending. They take such issue with the fact that there's an all-female crew, which is really sort of concerning on a number of levels, that they just can't accept the fact that 4 females together could team up and form a new iteration of the Ghostbusters. They also look at this as some sort of idea that a new Ghostbusters film would just ruin the fact that the 1984 Ghostbusters film is so beloved in their heart. They don't ever really take into account the fact that Ghostbusters 2, which I believe is 88, isn't really all that good, and doesn't seem to undermine or ruin anybody's enjoyment of that first Ghostbusters film. But when it comes to something like this, the pitchforks and the torches and just the outrage comes up to just ridiculous levels about how dare they, and this is going to be terrible, and blah, 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 blah. So I've been a pretty staunch defender of Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film in the idea of we don't know anything about this film, really. We haven't seen anything in motion. We haven't seen sort of the dynamic between the new Ghostbusters squad. We haven't seen really the approach to humor or whether or not it's going to play up the horror aspects that I think are what makes the original Ghostbusters film so great. We don't really know. We don't know tonally. We don't know visually. We don't know shit when it comes to Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. And as a result, with all the people who are just bitching and moaning about this film's very existence, I've come out time and time again and said, let's just see what this thing is. Let's wait. Let's see what this turns out to be before we rush into any sort of judgments, rather than hate it just for the fact that it's actually being made, which isn't really going to change Sony Pictures' mind anyway. They're going forward full force with a new Ghostbusters film. That's a fact, and it's never going to change no matter how much you fucking hate the idea that this movie is going to come into existence. So with that being said, I don't think that there's anything wrong with looking at this film and saying, well, I'm going to maybe give it the benefit of the doubt, or I'm going to hope for the best, because who really wants a bad Ghostbusters film out there in the world? Nobody. Nobody wants that. We all want a Ghostbusters film to be good. We all want a Ghostbusters film to be quality. We all want a Ghostbusters film to be entertaining. So to sort of go out of your way to root against this film or hope for it to fail, it's kind of just, I'm just going to go out and say it, it's kind of a dick move. That's all I've said is, like, let's wait and see. And if you look at it and it doesn't do anything for you and you say, this film's not for me, then so be it. You just walk away, you don't pay any attention to it, and you go on about your life. Even though we know that's not going to happen, there's going to be people who go out of their way to see it just so they can bitch about it, just so they can have the ammunition to hate it. And that's just a recipe for, well, just a sad life. Look, this whole time I've been saying, like, let's give this thing a chance. Let's see what it comes to be once we finally get a look at it, and then we'll move on from there, rather than judge it based off of still images and logos that aren't really any different, and maybe slight changes to the uniform. Well, this week, I'm going to reverse course just a little bit, because I did see something that was a little bit concerning, and quite frankly, kind of dumb. So once again, at Toy Fair, the 2016 version of the Toy Fair, Mattel had a booth set up to showcase their parts of their toy line for the new Ghostbusters film. Now, this involves some action figures of the new Ghostbusters characters, as well as a brand new proton pack that they want to show. It's kind of like a strap-on backpack for kids to be able to use in order to act like Ghostbusters, use your imagination, pretend to be Ghostbusters. So in that way, a lot of that stuff was kind of cool. But then there's also this idea of the Ghostbusters villain, who the new Ghostbusters villain will be. Now, months ago, Neil Casey was cast in the Ghostbusters film with the understanding that he was going to be playing the villain, quote-unquote, the villain, a character known simply as Rowan. Now, no other details were given as far as what the nature of this character was, how he interacts with the Ghostbusters, what the connection is with the new Ghostbusters, just how he comes into being or what his motivations are. None of that was out there. Well, when we go to the Mattel booth, and this is courtesy of Pixel Dan, I want to make sure he gets proper credit for getting this out into the world. Pixel Dan goes out and he examines the Mattel toy booth, and with the rep there, the Mattel rep showcasing the various products, we get to see this new villain known as Rowan. Now, it's sort of a Stay Puft Marshmallow type of character, I guess, except it's not the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Instead, Rowan is simply the ghost from the No Ghost Ghostbusters logo, brought into full-size form with sharp, pointy teeth and a bow tie. Now, if it sounds ridiculous, I just want to let you know that it looks just as bad, and that in seeing it, that was the first time I really had any level of concern that Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film may be on shaky ground. Now, within the context of the film, who knows how this thing is going to play? Who knows how it's going to look? Who knows how it's going to operate as a bad guy for the Ghostbusters to defeat? Now here, unfortunately, is where I'm going to judge a book by its cover, because Rowan as this ghost-type being / creature, it just frankly looks awful. It's an awful looking creature. The design of the creature looks awful. It's just a terrible thing. Now, I don't know how it's all going to come together. I don't know if Neil Casey is going to be playing Rowan as a human who's sort of transformed into this ghost character, sort of like Louis Tully and Dana Barrett were transformed, morphed into terror dogs in the original Ghostbusters. I don't know if Neil Casey is just doing mocap for this, and it's going to sort of be the Ghostbusters choose the form of their destructor again, and in order to try and come up with the most undestructive, most unthreatening creature they possibly could, they think of, by accident, the ghost on their logo. I don't know how it's going to come about. what I do know is that at least right now, taking a good look at this thing, it looks horrible. And I'm hoping that the toy and its awful design isn't representative of the film, which, you know, to a certain point may have a lot going for it, but will instantly pull me out when I recognize the fact that that ghost, which is completely innocuous as a symbol for the Ghostbusters, has now been made lifelike, and as a result, utterly ridiculous in Ghostbusters. So once again, a lot of it is going to come down to context, a lot of it is going to come down to tone, a lot of it is going to come down to how the film is built. But just taking a look at this thing doesn't really seem like a sound concept for them to have incorporated into the movie. That's all I'm saying. Will I be proven wrong down the road? It's possible. But as hopeful and optimistic and open-minded as I have been towards this particular Ghostbusters film to this point, this is the first time I've just sort of gotten that tinge in my belly. Just sort of that tightening up in my gut. That maybe all my hope has been for naught. We'll find out in July. Just saying though, right now, not feeling as good as I was like 3 days ago. All right, one more thing I want to get to, and that is Paramount announcing an expansion of their Transformers universe. I talked about this a little bit more in depth on the recent Just the Worst AMA podcast. That would have been episode number 5. So if you want to track that one down, I was asked specifically about a part of this that I went into depth on. So if you want to check that one out, by all means. But the Paramount has announced sort of an expansion of their Transformers universe, announcing 3 more films coming in the works, with Transformers 5 coming June 23rd, 2017, Transformers 6 coming June 8th, 2018, and Transformers 7 coming June 28th, 2019. Now, we have since learned that Transformers 6 is going to be a lower budget spin-off film that will be Bumblebee-centric. It's going to revolve solely around the Autobot Bumblebee, and I don't know what kind of story it is they're going to tell, but he's going to be off on his own sort of adventure, I guess, getting things going. But my feeling on this is, well, it was kind of inevitable. Paramount doesn't really have a lot of massive properties under its wing anymore, since cutting the deal with Disney to let the Marvel films sort of go back to Marvel Studios and be owned overall by Disney. And they right now, what do they have? They have G.I. Joe and they have the Ninja Turtles, and they have a deal with Hasbro and their Allspark Pictures to sort of make a lot of films based off those toys. I know they had some ideas about doing something for Mask and a bunch of other toys that I've never really heard of. But those still have to get off the ground. Transformers, they're 4 deep. They're still a global powerhouse at the box office. People go to the Transformers films. They're devoted to the Transformers brand. And as a result, Paramount's going to ride this thing out. They're going to try and make as many Transformers films as they possibly can, because that's the one thing that they can sort of lay claim to, that they could notch that one on the bedpost and say, yep, that's the one that we got. While Disney has a ton, and Universal has some, and Warner Brothers has theirs, Paramount, this is really it for them, is the Transformers. So to have this many Transformers coming out, it's not really a surprise to me, because they make a lot of money for the studio. And people like them, I guess. I'm not one of them, but if they're getting into number 7, it just goes to show that there is an audience. There are people that respond to these films and like to go see them. I'm not going to judge whatever you like, whatever floats your boat, whatever entertains you, more power to you. And the Transformers films are now just going to fill the void that those people feel when there's not a new Transformers film around, I guess. Now, the speediness of how quickly they're going to come, how quickly they're going to turn these around, that to me is where Paramount's playing with a little bit of fire, because you're trying to go the Marvel route, you're trying to go the Star Wars route, which is we're going to have one of these every single year, 2017, 2018, 2019. I think that is a riskier edge to sort of try to walk, because the thing about the Transformers films is that they go away every couple of years, and then they come back, but they go away for a little bit, allowing the fans to feel like they miss them, so that when a new one comes around, they go, oh man, I haven't seen the Transformers in a few years. I'm going to go out and watch this next one. And then they get excited. There's people who get excited about the Transformers movies. But when you just start churning them out on a yearly basis, there is no absence to make the heart grow fonder. Giant robots fighting on the big screen fails to be special when it happens with regularity. And that's the point where people start to go, well, now I need something more than just special effects. And we're 4 films deep into the franchise already, where they haven't really paid much attention to character or story. So it'd be a new element that they'd really have to develop pretty rapidly in order to make sure that fans either don't grow tired of the franchise or sort of grow jaded that they're just being thrown out garbage to capitalize on the fandom. So in that respect, I think that there is something here in the Transformers setup that Paramount absolutely should be concerned about, take note of, and pay attention to if they're going to keep making these films and expanding things outward. Because if the idea is, well, we'll just give them robots in disguise, and that'll be good enough, at some point, the audience is going to catch on, and they're going to say no, and then we're going to be talking about Transformers fatigue, and you will have ruined the one brand you actually have doing something in a positive manner for your studio. So that's my take on sort of the Transformers situation. If you want to hear a little bit more, once again, episode number 5 of Just the Worst AMA podcast, I'll break it down a little bit deeper for you. With that said, that is the show. I want to thank you for making it all the way through here as we wrap up this episode. Be sure to check out all of our social media accounts. So over on Twitter at JTW Podcast, that's the official podcast handle on Twitter of Just the Worst Podcast at JTW Podcast. Also, at Tis Infamous. This is Infamous. That's our home as we get that URL back up and running and rejuvenated. So in the meantime, at Tis Infamous, all our stuff is going to go on Twitter in the meantime, as well as the This is Infamous YouTube page, which I'll get to in a second. But make sure you follow that as well for announcements as things get rolling once again. And you can get all of my ramblings and musings together, or rambling musings, put them all together, at Infamous Kid. That's 2 D's at the end for you. So at Infamous Kid, that'll get you just everything that comes out of my mind on a regular basis. Over on Facebook, hit up all the profiles there as well. Make sure you like them and stay tuned to them. I know Facebook's got all their crazy algorithms, so stay tuned to them at facebook.com/justtheworstpodcast, facebook.com/tisinfamous, and facebook.com/BillyTheKid. Podcasts can be found at soundcloud.com. That's soundcloud.com/justtheworstpodcast. All of our various shows and all of their episodes are up there for you to find. And using your tablets or your mobile devices, you make sure you download the SoundCloud app, and you can have all of Just the Worst podcast episodes and shows at the touch of your finger. on your mobile devices. Just get the SoundCloud app. So soundcloud.com/justtheworstpodcast or the SoundCloud app on your mobile device for right now. As we get the URLs up and running, we'll be on Stitcher, we'll be on iTunes, so those subscriptions are coming. But right now, in the meantime, SoundCloud, that is the way for you to get all of the various shows we have coming to you. I want to thank you for listening to this particular show. I've been your host, Billy Donnelly. You can find my work regularly at JoeBlow.com. This is Infamous on our YouTube channel right now, as well as right here at Just the Worst Podcast. I'll be back next week to talk more movies and whatever else is going on out there in the world. So have yourself a pleasant, immediate future. I'm out. Peace. Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 23, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast.